Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Christine Larsen's graphic novel, Orcs. Now, I really like this. This is a fun adventure story featuring these sort of fantasy characters. And while it does deal with some important issues, things like leadership, group belonging, identity, loyalty, these sorts of things, it's never serious and heavy, right? It deals with these topics that can be quite challenging, can be quite difficult, but it deals with them in a way that it's very lighthearted and just enjoyable to read. So the story, this is, by the way, the first volume of what I think is maybe supposed to be a 4 or 6 part series altogether. I may or may not read the other series, the other volumes. I probably will because I quite like this, but I probably won't make videos about them. But we'll see. So basically, we have a group of orcs led by a guy named Bog, with his sort of a second in command, Utsu, her husband or mate, Gur, then Pez and Zep as their sort of rounding out their immediate group, and then Sprog and Wolfie. Sprog is the child of Utsu and Gur, who is not involved in the initial adventure, but when this group of adventurers gets exiled from their tribe of orcs, Sprog and Wolfie get exiled with them. So basically, these are the adventurers for this tribe of orcs. This tribe, for the most part, seems content just to sort of hang out in their little underground area, and the king, I can't remember if he's a king or a chief, but he really likes dance parties, and so they do a lot of dance parties. This group, Bog's group, are the ones who go out and basically do all of the tasks outside of this orc nest that the tribe wants done. So they go on adventures to retrieve loot, they go on raids, they do all the stuff. And then they bring they bring back whatever they gather, and 50% of it goes to the chief, and then they get the other 50%. The graphic novel starts with them getting sent out into the forest to find some loot. They get attacked by a group of squirrels, quite vicious squirrels. Here we got some squirrel on orc violence. And basically they do manage to defeat the squirrels and drive them off, and they get the loot, which turns out to be nuts. So they gather up all the nuts, which they don't really care about, but they also, as it turns out, gather up a bunch of the squirrels in a sack, and they bring that back to the chief for sending them out to get this loot, which was nuts. When the chief opens the bag, all of the squirrels leap out and start attacking the orcs. And so, as a penalty for this, the chief exiles Bog and his group. And they are now sort of out on their own. In the meantime, I think it's Pez or Utsu, I can't remember. One of them goes to bite into a nut, only to find out that they're actually gold inside. And so, because Bog's crew has kept the nuts and not given them to the chief, they manage to smuggle out a good amount of gold, with which, after their exile, they go to a dwarf with whom Bog has a history that is not exactly explained. The implication is sort of that they were lovers and Bog ran out on this dwarf. Arnheld is the dwarf's name. But it's not clear. But they use their gold to buy up a bunch of good armor, weapons, equipment, etc., as well as getting a good night's sleep, getting a lot of good food, and having a bath, etc., etc. Then they go on to have some various adventures, with the ultimate objective being that they will gather up a bunch of loot, and then in a couple of weeks, when the chief has, largely just forgotten the squirrels incident, they will buy their way back into the tribe. They don't necessarily succeed in collecting up a lot of loot, but they do have some adventures. At one point, for instance, in their hunger, they eat a bunch of mushrooms gathered in the forest, which are psychedelic mushrooms. And so they have these crazy psychedelic visions, etc., etc. Then they awake, and they're being attacked by some gnomes. Later on, they get captured by some... Let me find it. They get captured by some trolls, I believe. The trolls actually come before they eat the psychedelic mushrooms. But that remains irrelevant to my larger point, which is that they have a bunch of random adventures. And then they are attacked by these, what are they called? Wardens. The wardens seem to be like human rangers, sort of like a what's his name? That's not helpful. Lord of the Rings. Aragorn, I think. If I remember correctly. Yeah, sort of like Aragorn. Just like random human rangers out doing stuff, patrolling, whatever it is. And they're going to fight the Wardens, but the Orcs, Bog's crew, get sort of swept up by this magical mist that takes them to a temple. Let me find it. A temple with giant sword-wielding skeleton on the top. They aren't that keen on going into this, but they figure eventually that probably this mist was sent by the witch, who is an older orc, who part of her job seems to be just telling stories of Drode, or Drod, I'm not sure, to the younger orcs, the children orcs, orc children, whatever the proper order of those words is. So Drode, incidentally, is a sort of culture hero orc. By culture hero, I mean a figure of myth or legend who introduces important knowledge or sets the pattern for a culture's behavior, or something like this. So Drode was a great adventurer orc, and so her adventures become sort of the model for ideal orc behavior. And throughout this graphic novel, we have the adventures of Drode sort of threaded in there as she joins with these other individuals, an elf, another orc, and a siren, to sort of go on this great quest that we don't really ever find out what it's about, but they're going to have adventures, etc., etc. So, Bog's crew eventually sort of figure, all right, this mist that has sent us here and won't let us leave was probably sent by the witch. We probably have to go into that temple and have some sort of adventure, maybe retrieve some sort of loot or artifact or whatever it is. And they do that. They have to fight some living vines. But they eventually find this, the Sword of Druid. And they bring it back. Basically, well, they bring it back in the sense that they are brought back by this mist. And basically they use that to buy their way back into the tribe, basically because the witch is like, hey, chief, shut up, let him back in the tribe so I can have this important artifact. Which she is using to hold back some sort of evil entity from another dimension. But again, within this first volume, that's not really explained. We get hints of it, and presumably it will be developed more within the remaining volumes. But Bog and his crew are back at the end, and they have managed to negotiate a better position for themselves within this tribe. So they get all their old stuff back, they get their old nests back, and rather than paying 50% of whatever they find in the course of their adventuring, it's now going to be divided 6 ways between the people in 5 shares going to the people in Bog's group, and 1 share going to the chief, or the tribe. So, again, it's a fun, exciting adventure story. Really, really well done. Really, really just sort of heartwarmingly pleasant. Especially about a group of fantasy creatures, orcs, that are often not presented all that positively in fantasy literature.